The glass walls of the 42nd floor were supposed to be a design feature, a symbol of Apex Global Media's radical transparency, a monument to openness and collaboration. What they actually were, Harper had long concluded, was a stage. And today, she and Julian Mercer were giving the entire office the performance of the decade. "The campaign concept is too cold," she said, planting both hands flat on the obsidian conference table. Her voice was sharp and precise, cutting through the recycled boardroom air like a scalpel. Titan Horizon is a legacy brand trying to reposition itself as aspirational. You pitch them a spreadsheet dressed up as a vision board, and you know what they'll do? They'll smile, shake your hand, and walk straight to Meridian Creative. Julian didn't blink. He stood at the far end of the table, 6 feet 2 inches of immaculate, infuriating composure, his dark eyes fixed on her with the particular brand of contempt he seemed to reserve exclusively for her. His charcoal suit fit him the way architecture fits a skyline. Deliberately. Perfectly. Like it had been constructed around the broad lines of his shoulders rather than purchased off any rack known to man. "What you're describing," he said, his voice low and unhurried, "is emotional manipulation dressed up as strategy. Our data analysis shows that the Titan Horizon demographic responds to precision and authority, not to whatever mood board fever dream you've been cobbling together in that creative bubble of yours." Mood board fever dream. Harper straightened and tilted her head, her wavy blonde hair cascading over one shoulder. That's rich coming from a man whose idea of bold creative risk is switching from Helvetica to Garamond. And your idea of strategy is apparently throwing glitter at a problem and calling it innovation. It's called intuition, Julian. Some of us have it. Some of us also have a 42% client retention rate, he said. I, however, have 68. The glass wall audience, a collection of junior strategists and account managers who had by now entirely abandoned any pretense of working, watched in collective silence. This was not unusual. Harper and Julian had been performing variations of this exact scene since the day she had been promoted to creative director 14 months ago, the day she had walked into his glass-walled office to introduce herself, and he had looked up from his desk with those dark, unreadable eyes and informed her that he preferred to review new creative concepts in writing rather than in person. She had smiled at him, borrowed his pen without asking, written her personal cell number on his legal pad, and told him to call her when he pulled the marble column out of his backside. He had never called. He had also never returned the pen. She considered that a minor but meaningful victory. "The Titan Horizon pitch meeting is in 6 days, she said now, crossing her arms over her chest, painfully aware, as she always was in these moments, of exactly how his gaze tracked the movement. She refused to find satisfaction in it. Mostly. "If we go in there with your data-heavy, emotionally sterile framework and my campaign concept gets buried under pivot tables, we lose the account. If we go in there with your emotionally chaotic, structurally unsupported fantasy narrative and my strategic framework gets overridden by your obsession with aesthetic," he replied, "we also lose the account. Then maybe," she said, and the smile she gave him was sweet and sharp in equal measure, "you should let the person with actual creative instincts take the lead." "Maybe," he said, returning the smile with one that held the warmth of a winter window, "you should consider that instinct, without discipline, is just noise." The door opened. Neither of them looked away from each other immediately. It took the specific, atmospheric weight of Dominic Ashworth's presence to pull their attention sideways, and even then, it was gradual. Their CEO had the rare quality of making every room feel smaller simply by entering it. He was silver-haired, compact, and wore the particular expression of a man who had been standing in the corridor long enough to absorb the full texture of the argument, found it deeply tedious, and had decided to end it permanently. He set a leather portfolio on the table. He looked at Harper, He looked at Julian. He sat down. "Close the blinds," he said to no one in particular, and an assistant materialized from somewhere near the door and obliged. The silence that followed was of a distinctly different quality than the silence of the argument. This one had edges. "Reginald Voss," Dominic said, "called me this morning at 7:45. Harper and Julian both went still. Reginald Voss was not simply the CEO of Titan Horizon Industries. He was the kind of billionaire who still sent handwritten letters and expected them to be answered in kind. He was 71 years old, had built his company from a single regional manufacturing plant into a global lifestyle empire, and was reported to eat breakfast at the same time every morning, chair every board meeting in person, and hold more deeply traditional views on professional conduct and personal character than most institutions had held in decades. Titan Horizon was not just Apex's largest prospective account. It was the account that would define the next 5 years of the company's trajectory. "He wants a face-to-face before he commits," Dominic continued. "Not a pitch deck, not a video call. He wants to meet the team handling his brand, personally, over a weekend, at Silverpine Lodge. He flies in Saturday morning. He expects us Saturday afternoon." He paused. He specifically requested the leads on the account. Both of them. The word "both" landed in the room with the velocity of a dropped anchor. Harper felt the specific, cold clarity of what was coming a full 3 seconds before Dominic said it. "You're going together. The two of you. Saturday morning, private flight, Silverpine Lodge. You pitch the campaign in a unified, cohesive, collaborative presentation Sunday afternoon." He opened the portfolio, slid 2 travel itineraries across the table in opposite directions, one toward Harper and one toward Julian, and folded his hands. Voss has made it clear, repeatedly and on record, that he does not work with companies where internal dysfunction is visible. He values what he calls the character of a team. He wants to see people who trust each other, who function as a unit. Dominic looked at them both with an expression that could most accurately be described as exhausted finality. "I don't need to tell you what this account means to Apex. I also don't need to remind you that the two of you have been conducting what amounts to a cold war in my building for over a year. So I will say this once, clearly, and I will not repeat it." He let the pause do its work. If Reginald Voss sees one flicker, one moment, one suggestion of the dynamic I just watched through that glass wall, you are both dismissed. Not reassigned, not put on leave. Dismissed. Apex will survive losing one creative lead. It will not survive losing Titan Horizon and its reputation for internal cohesion simultaneously. So for this weekend, whatever this is between you two ends. You are colleagues. You are professionals. You are, as far as Voss is concerned, a team that actually likes each other. He stood, collected his portfolio, and looked at them both one final time. "The flight leaves at 9 Saturday morning. I suggest you spend the next 48 hours finding whatever it is that passes for common ground between you." He left. The door closed. The junior staff, apparently reading the atmospheric pressure correctly, found urgent reasons to relocate to other floors. Harper stared at the itinerary on the table in front of her. Then she looked across at Julian. He was already looking at her. "This," she said, "is your fault." "Illuminating as always," he replied, and picked up his itinerary. The private aircraft was everything corporate excess had promised, and nothing that made the situation more bearable. Harper had taken the window seat on the basis that she had arrived at the terminal first. Julian had taken the aisle seat on the basis that his legs were longer, a fact he stated without elaboration and with the tone of a man announcing a geological truth. The seat between them held her tote bag, his briefcase, and approximately 4 years' worth of unresolved professional hostility. For 40 minutes, they maintained a brittle, determined silence. Harper reviewed her campaign notes on her tablet. Julian reviewed his strategic framework on his laptop. The snow-dusted mountains outside grew larger and more dramatic as the aircraft climbed, and the December cold had begun to breathe through the insulated windows. Then the turbulence hit. Not severe, but enough. Harper's elbow slid off the armrest onto Julian's side at precisely the moment he extended his own arm, and what followed was a brief, absurd, entirely silent contest of incremental repositioning that ended only when the flight attendant arrived with champagne. Harper reached for her glass. The aircraft gave a small, polite lurch. The champagne did not reach her mouth. It reached Julian's left trouser leg, a pale gold cascade across dark charcoal wool, and the sound he made was quiet and precise and utterly devastating. She looked at the spreading stain. She looked at him. "I will buy you new trousers," she said. "I don't want new trousers," he said very calmly. "I want the ones I am currently wearing to not be saturated with Brute Blanc at 30,000 feet. He reached for the linen napkin the attendant extended with visible diplomatic sympathy and pressed it to his leg. Then he turned and looked at her directly, and his expression held the particular quality of a man exercising profound restraint. "I would also like," he added, quieter, so that only she could hear it, "for you to be wearing something that doesn't smell like an actual distraction." Harper blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Your perfume," he said, returning his attention to his laptop with the focused deliberateness of a man steering himself away from something. "It's overpowering in an enclosed space." It was not overpowering. She knew it was not overpowering. She also knew, with the particular dangerous clarity that came from 14 months of standing too close to Julian Mercer in conference rooms and corridors, that he had said it for exactly the reason that made her pulse do something it had absolutely no business doing. She turned back to her window, pressed her lips together, and watched the mountains rise white and enormous below her, and did not say another word. Silverpine Lodge arrived through the aircraft window like something conjured rather than built. It rose from the mountainside in pale stone and warm timber light, its peaked roof lines already thick with fresh snow, its windows glowing amber against a sky that had turned the color of a bruise. By the time the car service had wound them up the final switchback road from the private airstrip, that sky had made its intentions clear. The blizzard that the pilot had mentioned in passing as a minor weather system had, over the course of the descent, apparently reconsidered its ambitions. It was coming down in earnest now, fat and relentless, and the wind had taken on a tone that was less weather and more personal grievance. Harper pulled her coat tighter as they stepped under the lodge's arched entrance and told herself the chill at the back of her neck was purely meteorological. The lobby was all vaulted ceilings and firelight, and under other circumstances, she would have found it stunning. Under these circumstances, she was focused on the check-in desk, on getting her key, getting to a room with a door she could close between herself and Julian Mercer, and establishing the minimum viable conditions for professional survival. The clerk at the front desk was young and earnest, and wearing the expression of someone who had been trained to remain pleasant under considerable duress. "Reservation under Apex Global Media," Julian said, setting his briefcase on the counter with the efficient authority of a man who had checked into hundreds of hotels and expected the process to be frictionless. The clerk typed, stopped, typed again. Her expression entered a new register. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Our reservation system experienced a partial failure earlier this afternoon due to the storm. We've been working to reconcile the bookings." She typed a third time. "I do have you here. Mr. Mercer and Ms. Cole, arriving today, departing Monday." She looked up. "You're in the Silverpine honeymoon suite." The silence that followed was very complete. "I'm sorry," Harper said. "The honeymoon suite," Julian repeated. His voice was the voice of a man identifying a structural defect. "It's our finest room. 2-story, private terrace, mountain views from every—" "Is there another room available?" Julian said. It was not quite a question. The clerk's expression answered it before she did. The blizzard had driven half the mountain's population indoors in the last 4 hours. The lodge was at capacity. The suite was what they had. Harper looked at Julian. Julian looked at Harper. Some form of wordless negotiation occurred in the space between them, rapid and inconclusive, and they collected their key cards in silence. The suite was, objectively, extraordinary. Harper registered this, the way one registers the beauty of a natural disaster. There was indeed a private terrace, currently invisible behind a wall of horizontal snow. There was indeed a 2-story layout, a sitting room below, and a sleeping loft above, reached by a curved wooden staircase. There was a fireplace already lit. There were complimentary chocolates on the table, and a bottle of something sparkling in ice, and on every visible surface there were, with a commitment that Harper could only describe as aggressive, rose petals. She climbed the stairs slowly. She looked at the bed. It was enormous. It was dressed in ivory linen and approximately 300 rose petals and roughly 17 decorative pillows. And it was, in the categorical and load-bearing sense of the word, singular. "I'll call down," Julian said from the foot of the stairs. "They can bring a rollaway." "You do that," Harper said, and sat on the edge of the bed and began removing her heels, because her feet hurt, and she was going to need her composure fully assembled for whatever came next, and she couldn't assemble anything while her toes were being compressed. He was on the phone for 4 minutes. She counted. When he came upstairs, his expression was the expression of a man who had received information he found structurally unacceptable. "No rollaway," he said. "There's a sofa downstairs," she said. "It's decorative." She looked at the sofa. She looked at him. "Everything in this room is decorative. I'll take the sofa. You're 6'2". You'll fold in half. I've slept in worse conditions." "When? Did you once attend a retreat somewhere that had uncomfortable amenities? Did the thread count dip below 300? He looked at her for a long, flat moment. "The bed," he said, "is large enough for 2 adults to occupy simultaneously without any form of contact. We are professionals. We are capable of sleeping in the same room without—" The knock at the suite door was 3 measured, courteous raps. Both of them stopped talking. Julian went downstairs. Harper heard the door open, heard the exchange of pleasantries, and then heard, with a clarity that arrived about half a second too late to be useful, the warm, unhurried baritone of Reginald Voss. She was down the stairs in 4 steps, heels still off, and the scene she arrived at was a 71-year-old man in a cashmere cardigan standing in the doorway of their rose-petal-saturated suite, taking in, with the calm and comprehensive gaze of a man who had assessed many situations in his long life, every detail of the room. The champagne, the petals, the single visible staircase leading to the single visible sleeping loft. "I hope I'm not intruding," Voss said. "I always like to welcome our guests personally when I'm in residence. I find it sets the right tone for business." He smiled, the smile of a man who had built an empire on correctly reading rooms. "And I see you two have settled in nicely." Harper's brain performed a very rapid calculation. The suite, the petals, the single bed. Dominic's voice. If Voss sees one flicker, one moment, one suggestion of the dynamic. The non-negotiable value Voss placed on personal character, on the integrity of relationships, on the kind of old-world trust that came from knowing who a person was outside of a conference room. She felt Julian move. She felt his arm come around her waist from behind, his hand settling at her hip with a warm, deliberate pressure, his broad chest solid against her shoulder blades, and she understood, in the precise half-second before he spoke, what he was doing, what they were doing. "Not at all," Julian said, and his voice had shifted into something she had never heard from him before, something warmer and easier, like a frequency she hadn't known he could access. "Harper and I were just getting settled. It's a beautiful suite." He paused, and she felt rather than heard the decision he made. We've been keeping the engagement quiet at the office, he said. We like to keep professional and personal separate. But there's no point pretending otherwise here. Voss looked at them both. His face moved into something that was more than pleased, that was specifically and genuinely delighted in the way that only certain people of a certain generation were delighted by the idea of two young professionals navigating both ambition and love. A fiancée, he said. Well, that changes the texture of the weekend entirely. He extended his hand, and Harper, operating entirely on instinct, reached out and shook it. I always believe you learn more about a person's character from how they love than from how they work. The two of you must join me for dinner. I insist. Dinner lasted 2 hours and demanded more sustained, concentrated performance than any pitch Harper had ever given. She held Julian's hand across the table when Voss looked at them, which was often. Julian fed her a piece of poached pear from his own plate at some point, in response to some story Voss was telling about his late wife's sweet tooth, and the look Julian gave her when he did it was so precisely, convincingly tender that something in her chest did something she immediately classified as a stress response. She laughed at the right moments. Julian's thumb moved in a slow, absent arc across her knuckles, and she told herself he was simply committed to the performance. She told herself that 14 times over the course of the main course alone, Voss finally retired at 9:30, satisfied and warm, promising to see them both at the pitch the following afternoon. They walked back to the suite in silence. They entered. The fire had burned lower. The temperature in the room had begun to negotiate with the blizzard outside, and the negotiation was not going well. Harper picked up a rose petal from the duvet and let it fall. Engaged, she said. It was the fastest solution to a complex problem, Julian said, removing his jacket. You introduced me as your fiancé to a billionaire client. I introduced you as my fiancé to a man who would have spent the rest of the weekend looking for evidence of dysfunction between us. It bought us goodwill we couldn't have manufactured any other way. He looked at her, and the warm performance from dinner was completely gone. They were back to their default frequency. You're welcome. She threw a pillow at him. He caught it. At midnight, the heating system failed. There was no ambiguity about this. The temperature dropped with a directness that felt vindictive, and the extra blanket from the wardrobe helped only in the way that a single umbrella helps two people in a proper downpour. They had constructed a pillow barrier down the exact center of the bed, an architectural DMZ that Harper had engineered with a precision she refused to acknowledge as competitive. Stay on your side, she said. I have no interest in your side, he said. She turned off the lamp. The darkness was full of the sound of wind and, beneath it, the soft sound of two people trying to occupy the same space without admitting they were sharing it. She did not know when she fell asleep. She knew only that the cold came in gradually and completely, and that at some point the logic of survival overrode every other consideration, and that warmth was warmth, and the body did not negotiate ideology at 3 a.m. She woke to gray early light filtering through the snow-weighted curtains. She was warm. She was profoundly, entirely, mortifyingly warm, because she was folded against Julian's side with her head on his chest and her arm across the plane of his torso, and her legs tangled with his beneath the duvet, and the pillow barrier was somewhere on the floor, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and quiet, just below her ear. She went very still. He was awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, which was different from sleep. She became aware, slowly and with a kind of dread, that she was being looked at. She tilted her head upward by a fraction, not enough to fully raise her eyes, just enough to see the line of his jaw, the dark lashes, the direction of his gaze. He was looking at her mouth, not the way he looked at a problem. Not the way he looked at a spreadsheet or a rival or a person he was planning to outmaneuver. He was looking at her mouth the way she had caught him not looking at her in 14 months of standing across conference tables, the thing he had hidden perfectly under contempt and precision and biting professional critique. now entirely undisguised in the gray morning light because he thought she was still asleep. Harper held very still. Her heart was loud in her own ears. The blizzard pressed against the windows, patient and indifferent, and Julian Mercer looked at her like she was something he had been trying not to want for a very long time. The city received them back with its usual indifference. The financial district's towers caught the morning light and threw it back without warmth, and the traffic moved with its standard aggression. And Apex Global Media's lobby smelled exactly as it always had, like recycled air and ambition, and the particular brand of collective anxiety that sustained a company living perpetually on its next big pitch. Harper walked through the glass doors on Monday morning in her sharpest heels, her coffee in hand, and told herself that Silverpine Lodge had been a professional exercise in controlled performance, and that she had performed, and now she was home, and things were exactly as they had been. She believed this for approximately 4 minutes. The problem was not the office. The office was familiar. The problem was that familiarity had changed its character. The 42nd floor, which she had navigated for over a year with complete territorial confidence, now had a Julian-shaped distortion in it. She was aware of him in the way you become aware of a sound once someone has named it. The specific weight of his footstep in the corridor. The angle of his shoulders when he stood at the window of his glass-walled office reviewing documents. The way he held his coffee cup with one hand and scrolled with the other. And the way he occasionally paused in that scrolling, and the direction that pause tended to point. She told herself she was imagining the direction. She sat down at her desk and opened her campaign files and told herself this with considerable firmness. Across the floor, Julian Mercer reviewed a media strategy breakdown for the third time without absorbing a single number and decided that the document required no further review, closed his laptop, and opened it again immediately. He had spent the return flight in the window seat because Harper had taken the aisle on the grounds that she had given it to him on the way, and balance required reciprocity. And he had spent 3 hours watching the cloud cover below them and thinking, with the obsessive and structurally useless clarity of a man who had finally seen something he could not unsee, about the quality of winter morning light on a particular person's hair. He had reviewed this thought pattern, identified it as counterproductive, and applied every discipline at his disposal to its elimination. He had made genuine progress for approximately 4 minutes before she had shifted in her seat, and the specific scent of her perfume had moved through the recycled cabin air and entirely dismantled his progress from the inside. Back at the office, he was methodical about it. He did not look across the floor more than necessary. When he attended Tuesday's strategy review, and she was 3 seats down the table, he focused on the presentation screen with a concentration that could have bent steel. When she argued a point about the preliminary Titan Horizon draft, he countered it on its merits, clinically, without making eye contact for longer than the conversational minimum. She matched his register precisely, and the professionalism of their mutual restraint was so complete that 2 junior account managers quietly bet on whether they had finally reached a détente. They had not reached a détente. Julian knew exactly what they had reached, and it was significantly less stable than that. Wednesday arrived with the specific cruelty of a day that has decided to be difficult. Julian was in his office at 10:30, reviewing audience segmentation data with the door open, when the delivery arrived on the floor below. He heard it before he saw it. The reception desk calling up to confirm, the elevator opening, the rustle of paper, and the specific, ostentatious noise of a large floral arrangement being transported past the open-plan desks. He didn't look up initially. He looked up when the murmuring started. They were roses. Red, in the unambiguous, declaration of intent way that red roses had been communicating one specific thing for several centuries. There were a significant number of them, arranged in a tall glass vase with the kind of tied ribbon extravagance that came from an expensive florist who understood theater. They were placed on Harper's desk by an assistant who smiled broadly, and Harper, who had just come out of a creative review, stopped at the edge of her desk and looked at them with an expression that Julian, from his elevated vantage point, could not read precisely, but could read well enough. She read the card. She smiled. It was a small smile, private, tilted slightly at the corner, and it was absolutely not directed at Julian in any way whatsoever. The segmentation data on his screen lost all coherence. He stood up. He sat down. He looked at the segmentation data. He stood up again, walked to his office door, closed it, and then opened it again, because closing it would have been an action with visible implications. He called his assistant in and asked for a status update on the Titan Horizon timeline review, received it, and spent 0% of his processing capacity absorbing it. He was aware, with the peripheral acuity of a man in a specific kind of distress, that Harper was now on her phone. He was aware that she was turned slightly away from the floor, which was the position a person adopted when a conversation was personal. He went to the strategy team's midday check-in and corrected a junior analyst presentation framework with a precision that made two people at the table flinch. When someone mentioned in passing that the weekend gala was a good chance to network, he said yes, with the tone of a man who has never considered networking anything but instrumental. When someone else, with the cheerful obliviousness of a person who did not know they were in a minefield, mentioned that Harper had apparently told Lena from accounts that she had a date planned after the gala, a setup from her mother, some finance executive, very successful, very handsome apparently, Julian's pen made a mark on his notepad that was not a note so much as an indentation. "Good for her," he said in a voice of such controlled neutrality that the person who had delivered the information decided to examine their own notepad closely and say nothing further. The afternoon had a specific quality of mounting pressure, the way the air feels in the hour before a summer storm, when everything is still but the stillness has a texture. Julian sat through 2 more meetings. He reviewed 3 documents he would later have no recollection of reviewing. He watched, once, from the corridor, as Harper stood at the window of the creative suite talking to a colleague, her wavy hair catching the afternoon light, laughing at something, completely at ease and entirely unreachable, in the way that people become unreachable when they are not thinking of you at all. He returned to his office. He stood at his window. Below, the financial district moved through its afternoon rhythms, and above it, gray evening was beginning to press in from the edges of the sky. The gala was held in Apex's event space on the 38th floor, all ambient lighting and catered excess, the kind of company celebration that was really a performance of prosperity for the benefit of whoever in the room needed to believe in it. Harper arrived in something dark red and precisely, devastatingly fitted, and Julian noticed this the way you notice a fire alarm, immediately and with your entire nervous system. He spent the first 40 minutes in conversation with Voss's representative, who had joined remotely via a presentation loop, and periodically did not look across the room at Harper laughing with a colleague, and once did not look at her setting down her champagne glass on the bar with the particular elegant ease she had for physical gestures that she was completely unconscious of. He checked his watch. It was 9:15. He had heard, at some point in the last 24 hours, through the specific osmosis of an open-plan office that retained no secrets, that the date was at 10, that the restaurant was the kind with a reservation list that implied intention. He set down his own glass. The break room at the end of the 42nd floor was narrow and utilitarian, and lit with the particular flatness of a fluorescent panel that the facilities team had been meaning to replace for 2 months. It smelled like coffee grounds and the faint ghost of someone's reheated lunch. It was the least romantic room in a building that had a suite on the 38th floor, currently decorated with orchids. Harper came through the door at 9:20, coat over her arm, bag on her shoulder, clearly in transit. She was leaving. She was leaving to go meet a finance executive who had sent her roses and made a reservation, and had, as far as Julian could determine, done absolutely nothing wrong beyond existing at a moment in time when Julian's entire structural architecture of professional detachment had collapsed without warning. He followed her in. She turned when she heard him and her expression moved through surprise and into something guarded and assessing. He was aware that he looked the way he felt, which was not the way he was supposed to look in a professional setting. He reached up and pulled at his tie, the careful Windsor knot he'd tied that morning with the same precision he applied to everything, pulling it loose with a single frustrated motion that he did not plan and did not stop. He put one hand against the wall to her left, then the other to her right. He was close enough to see the specific color shift in her hazel eyes, close enough that his exhale moved a strand of her hair. He could hear his own breathing. He couldn't do anything about it. "You're going," he said. It came out lower and rougher than he intended. "That's generally what leaving looks like. Yes," she said. But her voice had dropped too, and she hadn't moved, and the distance between them was something neither of them was pretending was accidental anymore. "To meet him." He said it flatly, the way you state a fact you find structurally intolerable. "You're going to sit across a table from some boring, perfectly adequate stranger and let him think he has any idea who he's looking at." Harper's chin lifted. Her eyes were very bright. "Julian?" He kissed her, not gently, not tentatively. He kissed her the way a dam breaks, all at once and with the full weight of everything that had been building behind it, 14 months of deliberate restraint and biting professional critique and proximity that had cost him more than any budget negotiation had ever cost him. All of it compressed into one desperate, fierce, consuming point of contact. His hand moved from the wall to her jaw, and the other found her waist and drew her forward, and she made a small, sharp sound against his mouth that lasted 1/2 second before her hand found the front of his shirt and pulled. And then there was no ambiguity left about anything at all. The weeks that followed the breakroom had a quality Harper could only describe as charged. Not the hostile charge of their former rivalry, which had been the electricity of two opposing systems grinding against each other, but something deeper and more dangerous. A current that ran beneath the surface of every ordinary professional interaction and made ordinary professional interactions feel like an elaborate shared performance. Which, in certain respects, they still were. They told no one. This was a practical decision, arrived at wordlessly in the breakroom itself in the 30 seconds after the kiss ended, when Harper had looked at him and Julian had looked at her, and they had both understood without discussion that Apex Global Media's open-plan 42nd floor was not a space that tolerated private information. They maintained their professional registers. They disagreed in meetings. Harper argued creative direction with the same sharp precision she always had. Julian countered with strategy and data, and the occasional biting remark about her instinct over evidence methodology. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. To anyone watching carefully, everything had. What they had instead were the stolen geometries of a building that closed down after 7. Empty conference rooms with the lights off. A supply corridor on the 39th floor that no one used after 6. The elevator, most reliably, when the floors were quiet and the only evidence was the number panel cycling between floors for slightly longer than a single passenger would require. Julian kissed her the way he did everything else, with total concentration and absolute commitment, as if her mouth were a problem he had decided to solve thoroughly. And Harper, who had spent over a year being infuriated by the particular quality of his focus, discovered that when it was directed differently, it was one of the most disorienting and consuming experiences she had encountered in 26 years of living. They were 3 weeks in, and the Titan Horizon final pitch was 4 days away when the photograph surfaced. Harper found out from Lena in accounts, who had heard from someone in business development, who had apparently been contacted by someone at Meridian Creative, their primary rival agency, with the cheerful professional malice of a company that had recently lost a major prospective account to Apex, and found the timing of a scandal convenient. The photograph had been taken in the parking structure 2 floors below street level. Grainy, but clear enough, Harper and Julian caught in the amber wash of a parking light in a moment that was not ambiguous about what it was. Meridian's plan, as best as Harper could piece it together, was to deliver it to Voss's office before the final pitch. The angle they were selling was unprofessionalism. The suggestion that Apex's leads had fabricated the engagement story for client manipulation and were conducting an undisclosed personal relationship that compromised the integrity of the account. It was, in the cold light of its mechanics, an effective play. Voss was traditional. Voss valued character. And a story about two professionals who had invented an engagement as a pitch strategy and hidden a relationship from a client while working on his account was, from a certain angle, exactly the kind of story that ended contracts. She found Julian at his desk at 8:30 that evening, the floor mostly empty, his jacket off and his sleeves rolled back, working through the final pitch framework with the focused intensity he brought to anything he considered unfinished. She told him what she knew. He listened without interrupting. Then he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment, and she recognized the particular quality of that quiet, the way he looked when he was moving pieces. "We don't manage it," he said. She waited. "We don't get ahead of the photograph. We don't issue a preemptive explanation. We don't let them control the frame." He looked at her. And his expression was the expression she had come to understand over the last 3 weeks as the one beneath all the others, the one that was not professional or strategic or composed. That was just him. We walk into that room and we tell the truth. The pitch meeting was held in a private boardroom at Voss's city headquarters, a room of dark wood and tall windows, and the particular formality of old money made into architecture. Voss sat at the head of the table with 3 members of his executive board and his longtime legal counsel, a woman whose expression had been professionally neutral for so long it had become structural. 2 people from Meridian Creative were also present, invited by Voss's office for a comparative review, and they occupied seats at the far end of the table with the barely contained satisfaction of people who believed they were holding the last card. Harper and Julian entered together. She had dressed carefully, dark blazer, a silk blouse the color of winter cream, heels she could stand in for 4 hours without accommodation. Julian was in his best suit, the charcoal one she had ruined with champagne on an aircraft that felt like it belonged to a different version of their story. He carried the presentation materials. She carried the creative portfolio. They took their positions at the presentation end of the table, and the room settled. The Meridian lead reached into a folder. Julian moved first. He did not reach for the presentation remote. He set down the portfolio, straightened to his full height, and looked at Reginald Voss with the direct, uncalculating steadiness of a man who had decided that the most strategic thing he could do was stop performing strategy. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to tell you something true." The room adjusted its attention. The Meridian lead paused. "Harper and I were rivals before we were anything else," Julian said. "We disagreed about nearly everything. We argued in boardrooms and corridors and on aircraft at altitude, and we were both convinced the other person's approach was professionally insufficient." He paused, and then, with the deliberateness of a choice rather than an impulse, he turned and extended his hand toward her. Harper took it. His grip was steady and warm. "And then we spent a weekend at Silverpine Lodge, preparing to pitch your account, and somewhere between the blizzard and the forced proximity and the singular reality of working alongside someone who is genuinely, formidably brilliant in exactly the ways you are not, something shifted." He looked back at Voss. "The engagement wasn't invented as a manipulation. It was invented in a panic, and then it became real, because the thing it was covering for was already real. We just hadn't admitted it yet. We are not performing a relationship for your benefit. We are in one, imperfectly and somewhat chaotically, and we decided this morning that you deserve to know that before we ask for your trust." The room was very quiet. Voss's expression was unreadable. Julian picked up the presentation, remote. What followed was the best pitch Harper had ever witnessed. She knew her own campaign concept, inside and out. She had built it across 6 weeks of work and the creative intuition of a decade of professional instinct. But she had never heard it delivered in Julian's architecture. Her emotional intelligence and narrative vision, supported by his strategic precision. Her instinct, given the structural scaffolding of his discipline. The two frameworks, not competing, but load-bearing against each other, the way opposing forces make a bridge. He moved through the slides with a quiet authority that made the room lean forward. He cited her creative rationale with the same exactness he applied to his data. When he pulled up the campaign narrative she had written, he read from it without condescension, with the tone of a man presenting evidence of something he found genuinely valuable. At the end, he closed the portfolio and looked at Voss and said, simply, that the partnership that had produced the pitch was the same partnership they were committing to the account. Voss looked at them for a long time. His counsel made a note on her legal pad. At the far end of the table, the Meridian lead set the folder down. "I have been in business," Voss said, "for 47 years. I have worked with a great many agencies, and I have sat through a great many pitches. In that time, I have found that the quality of a team's work is almost always a direct reflection of the quality of their honesty." He looked at Harper, then at Julian, then at their joined hands on the table. "I will tell you that I prefer the truth. I always prefer the truth. And I will also tell you that the campaign you have presented is the most compelling thing I have seen for this brand in 20 years. He nodded once, with the finality of a man who had built an empire on direct decisions. "You have the contract." 6 months changed the geometry of things in ways that Harper was still, occasionally, surprised by. Her name was on the door now, alongside Julian's, in the clean typographic weight of Apex Global Media's standard signage. Co-partners, creative, and strategy. The office they shared was large and corner-facing and caught the afternoon light from 2 directions. And it was, at any given point, in a state of considered disorder that represented the exact midpoint between Julian's architectural precision and Harper's creative entropy. He had his side of the room. She had hers. The line between them was entirely theoretical, and both of them crossed it freely. On a Thursday in late spring, Harper sat on the edge of his desk. This was not accidental. She sat on the edge of his desk on a semi-regular basis, specifically because it made him look up from his work with the expression of a man whose blood pressure is being interfered with, and she had discovered, over the last 6 months, that she still enjoyed getting under Julian Mercer's skin enormously. It just produced different results now. She moved his legal pad. She shifted a perfectly ordered stack of his folders 3 inches to the left. She watched him register this with the specific tightening around his eyes that she had once read as contempt and now read correctly as the thing it had always been underneath. He set down his pen. He pushed back his chair. He reached out and took hold of her waist and pulled her off the desk and onto his lap in a single motion that had become familiar in the way that all the best things become familiar. Thoroughly, without diminishing. She settled against his chest. Through the corner windows, the financial district ran its perpetual circuits below, indifferent and relentless, and entirely unaware that up on the 43rd floor, something that had once been a Cold War had become something else entirely. Harper had spent a long time believing that victory was what you achieved by defeating your opponent. She had built a career on outmaneuvering and outperforming, on being sharper and faster and more creatively audacious than the person across the table. She had believed, for over a year, that Julian Mercer was the obstacle between her and everything she was working toward. What she knew now, in the specific and irreversible way you know things that have reorganized you from the inside, was that the greatest wins she had ever achieved had nothing to do with defeating him. They had come from the moment she had stopped fighting the pull and let herself fall into it, From the morning in a snow-white suite when she had held still and let herself see what he was, from the breakroom and the boardroom and every honest, difficult, luminous moment that had followed. The Rivals playbook, as it turned out, had only one real strategy, and it wasn't competition. It was surrender to exactly the right person at exactly the right time. If you enjoyed this Enemies to Lovers office romance audiobook, please hit the like button and subscribe for more epic stories.